Hi, my name is Rianne, and this is my first video.
My name is Jordan, and I am helping.
So, for this video, we are working on making a Zelda cosplay. I am making her blue dress from Breath of the Wild. To make the pattern, we are just using an old t-shirt that I don't like or want anymore and putting duct tape over the areas that I want the garment to cover, and just sort of adding more and more tape until I have more than enough room, and because you can always cut off the excess, but it's hard to add more once you decide you're finished. For this to work with this duct tape pattern making method, it is easiest when you have help or a friend or a buddy, so that you can make sure to have them help you with your back, because it's really hard to do it correctly on your own back and even just impossible.
Yep, that's my job.
So with some help and direction, Jordan is helping me put the tape in the correct places and just overall cover my back where the pattern needs to be. And I do instruct her to put extra so that we can just cut off the excess. And don't forget to have fun with it. when you're making a pattern, it is really helpful to have a reference photo on hand. And when you have enough area covered that you can start outlining it, you're going to draw a center line down your front and one down your spine, because you really only need half the pattern, and then you can just flip and mirror it when you're cutting out the pieces.
Unless it's unsymmetrical.
Unless it's unsymmetrical, that's very important, because if it's unsymmetrical, then using only half of the pattern would result in a symmetrical something instead of what you actually want. But thankfully, this pattern is symmetrical, so Jordan is just helping me draw the lines where I can't reach properly and where I can't see. And you're going to draw all of the lines where you're going to cut it in order for the pattern to look how you want it to. Like I said, it's also very helpful to have a reference photo online so that you can add any decorative seams that may be on the garment, or if there's going to be a seam that's important that isn't there, you can make sure to put it somewhere where it's not like the center of attention. And just overall, make sure you have all of the lines you need, and ask for help if you need to. Right, now that we have the pattern made, we're going to cut it off. For the sake of the video, I have a shirt on underneath, but if you feel comfortable not having a shirt on in front of whoever's helping you, then you can just wear your undergarments. But it's also just helpful to have an undershirt underneath, just if you're worried about having the undershirt cut, make sure it's also something you don't really care about. Now that we have the pattern cut off of our body and the half of it that we need cut away from the rest of it, we're going to cut out each and all of the pieces into the correct shapes, and so that they're not all just one big funky piece that won't lay flat. You want your pieces to lay flat so that you can lay them out on your fabric and cut out all of your pieces. So once you have them all cut out, you label them.
Also, quick pro tip, if you mess up a line and you're using Sharpie on top of the duct tape, scratching it will erase it.
Yes, using your fingernail will erase it. So now we're getting out fabric and laying it out flat. Make sure you draw on the correct side of the fabric. If you draw on the side that you want to show, then your lines might show. And so make sure you are drawing your pattern on the back of the fabric, not the front, not the pretty side. So you're going to lay out all of your pieces and take a pencil or a washable marker. This is a washable pencil that will come off in the wash, but you can also use like a washable marker or a pen, whatever works for you. And you're going to draw around your pattern pieces. Make sure you add seam allowance if you're going straight from a duct tape pattern, because this pattern does not have seam allowance added to it. When you use it, if you do not add seam allowance, when you go to sew it together and then put it on, it will be smaller than you want it to be, and therefore will not fit you. So make sure you add seam allowance. I think I added about a centimeter worth of seam allowance around all the edges, and make sure you're labeling each piece. And then once you have all of the pieces for one half, you flip the pattern over and use the other side and do the same thing.
And this creates a mirrored, which will give you that symmetrical design, so you have both sides.
Yes, exactly. So, like we said before, if you are making a garment that is not symmetrical, make sure you use the whole pattern and not just half of it like this. At this point, I have cut out all of the pieces in the blue, and for Zelda's dress in the Breath of the Wild, she does actually have like a red fabric inlay on her top, and so I have a pretty red fabric that I'm also using, and you'll notice that instead of using the pattern, I'm tracing around the blue pieces I already have cut out. That's because I want them to be exactly the same, and sometimes when you're adding the seam allowance, if it's going to be the lining of a second fabric, adding the seam allowance around the pattern can make tiny little differences that can be annoying later, which is why I had just traced around the blue fabric itself. And so then you cut it out and you have all your pieces. But when you are tracing around other fabric pieces that you already cut out with seam allowance, don't add extra seam allowance, because then it will have more seam allowance than you actually want it to. So that's why I drew right around the edge of the blue. At this point, I have made a pattern for the sleeve, or a simple sleeve pattern, and then I have sliced it multiple times right down the middle and then around it, and have spread out the pattern in order to make a poofy sleeve, or almost like a princess sleeve. And then she has a long sleeve attached to that, which you see I just kind of freehanded that pattern instead of making an actual one. And then I have sewn all of the edges together. Make sure you sew right sides together, and when you sew your lining and everything like that together, sometimes you gotta make sure you don't actually sew all the edges, because if you sew all of the edges, then you can't turn it right side out correctly. So I actually did make that mistake and had to seam rip multiple seams around the sleeves in order to flip it the correct way and then sew it again. But eventually you'll have it all turned around, and then you stitch around the edges so that it's all closed and stays how you want it, and then you add your zipper and
Put all your pieces together.
put all the pieces together. That's right. And what you see me doing there with the hot glue gun is actually just making it so that the zipper doesn't come off the end, because I did trim the zipper to be shorter. But because that zipper does come apart at the bottom, I couldn't cut off excess from the bottom. I had to cut it off of the top, which took off the little part that stops the zipper from coming off. So I had to close it again. And here you see I'm adding gold trim around specific places. And so I have kind of very carefully wrapped it all the way around and sewn it in place.
This is it on the mannequin with other parts that were bought, not made.
Yes, I bought those parts on Amazon. They were just really simple, just found them and purchased them, made sure I got them in my size. And then at this point, I did not actually use the sewing machine to stitch on this gold trim, because it had lots of little rhinestones on it and I didn't want to break any needles, so I ended up just stitching it on by hand. And ultimately, it worked great and it stayed on, and it still has stayed on multiple days and days later. And as you're moving around, it helps to have it on the mannequin like this so that you can make sure that you sew everything without it sliding and becoming not lined up anymore. And just sewing it in place really carefully, and had to move the sleeve out of the way. Right here, you can see that I'm adding that same trim that's around the rib cage area, around the sleeves. And I also sewed that on by hand. And then I have started using a gold fabric paint in a metallic shade to put on other details that she has. And there's Frederick. The gold was in specific patterns on her dress in the reference photo, and I did not like the way I had a ribbon that I was going to do this with originally, but it just did not look the way I wanted it to when I tried to pin it in place. So I ultimately chose to do all of these details in the gold paint, and I absolutely love the way it came out. And you'll actually see that I went over a couple of the decorative seams that were there, and then went further past them into other spots that could have been decorative seams but would have been a little over the top because they would have been covered like this. And then her little emblem or whatever in the front with the detailing. And then I did have some gold ribbon because she had this like free floating strappy piece going on. And then after that, I started on the skirt, and I just made a really simple half circle skirt and did around the edges with a gold binding. And then I have pinned in place this like lace trim, and I'm just doing that really carefully, one at a time, one piece at a time.
Also, the design on the sleeves is with the same gold paint as the design on the top.
Oh, good point. I didn't catch that. And I actually did that off camera, and I completely forgot to film it, but I was in a hurry at that point, so. And then when I was making this, I actually ended up making it. It was originally intended to be a Halloween costume, and then I also ended up wearing it to a Renaissance fair, and that was amazing. So I'm just pinning that all the way around the edge, and I did put that gold binding all the way around the bottom edge as well of the skirt, but it kind of got covered with the trim. Right here, I'm using like a gold or like a harvest gold colored fabric that I have sewn into just a long tube with the outside showing really pretty, and then I am just folding it and manipulating it and pinning it in place, and then I will tack stitch that on by hand. Right here, I'm using more of that gold paint to do some more of that specific detailing on the skirt. And Jordan is being cameraman at the moment. Lots of zooming in, awesome. She gotta get all the details.
All the details.
We were in such a hurry at this point because we were trying to go to bed in time to wake up really early the next morning. And here we are at the Ren Fair. Lots of fun. A friend of ours went as Link, and she looked amazing.
And I was a mushroom. Oh, you timed that so perfect.
And then here we are at Halloween Day with a couple other friends and just having fun. And my dad actually took these pictures. That was great.